Hi, Rachel.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah. All right, we're excited to see what you have to bake. I'm gonna pop off the screen and let you take it, and then I'll come back with some questions, and if people have any questions, they can put them in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll go through a couple.
Okay, sounds like a plan.
Okay.
So hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Berneir-Green, and as I shared before, I am the founder and owner of Laine's Bake Shop here in Chicago, and I started the company about 8 years ago. Today, we're going to make one of my favorite brownie recipes, and I love this recipe for two reasons. One, it's so versatile, but two, it includes some ingredients that we're not used to seeing in brownies, but that kind of adds to the flavor. So this brownie is going to be definitely on the fudgier side. It's a completely rye-based brownie. And so today I'm using a dark rye flour from Janie's Mill, which is a local farm and miller. And then we are using two types of chocolate. So for me, the best brownies always include when you have both melted chocolate and then when you have cocoa powder. And so for both of the chocolates, we are using Calabo chocolate. And we specifically use that brand because of their commitments to eradicating child and slave labor in the supply chain, which is a really big issue with cocoa suppliers. And so today we're doing a version of this brownie that's inspired by a Mexican hot chocolate. So I don't know if any of you have had it, but I know American hot chocolate tends to be, it's milky and sweet. And so the first time when I was growing up and I had a Mexican hot chocolate, it was a completely different experience. So it was rich, but I think the part that stood out to me the most was the intensity of like the warming spices that accompany the chocolate. And so much so now that spiced chocolate in a variety of forms is one of my favorite things. So whether we're talking about this brownie or if we're talking about a rich mole sauce, or another version of this brownie that you can do at home. So today we're doing the Mexican hot chocolate version, but recently I've tried this Ethiopian spice blend, Berberay, and this actually makes a great change to the brownie. So I'd encourage you, we'll walk through it today, but I encourage you to play around with the flavor profile and the spices that you add. You'd be surprised at what pairs really well with chocolate. So before we get started, I wanted to point out one last thing that makes this brownie special, and that is the rye flour. So probably say like 2 years ago, I thought rye flour was for making rye bread, which I was not particularly fond of. So I thought, there's no need for us to have rye in the bakery. But thankfully, when I joined the Artisan Grain Collaborative, one of the things I learned, and one of the panelists, Adriana, spoke to this earlier, is that it's really important that we use all of the grains either in a rotation or grown collaboratively. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I keep an eye on the comments. So that when we're growing these grains, that they are actually regenerating the earth that they're in and not just depleting it. And so that was when I learned, okay, maybe it's important for us to try to use things other than wheat. I was not particularly sold on rye, but we did a trial where we tested rye in a variety of different recipes, from cookies to pie crust. And that was the first time I said, okay, there might be something here. And for those of you that don't know, rye has a naturally lower gluten content than wheat flour, which makes it well suited to providing a more tender crumb to cookies, using it in some cakes, and it's going to make this brownie even denser and is fudgier a word? We're going to pretend that it is for right now. So to start off, I have this bowl, I have some dark brown sugar, and then I have some raw sugar. And then here I have my eggs and vanilla already mixed up. So normally I do this in a hand mixer, but today to spare you guys the sound of listening to the KitchenAid whir, I'm going to whisk this up by hand, just breaking up this brown sugar, Have those eggs in there. And meanwhile, my chocolate and butter is cooling. So in the recipe, it does suggest melting the chocolate in a double boiler. But one of the nice things about this is because we melt the chocolate with butter, it actually allows us to melt the chocolate in the microwave without it breaking. So that's a kind of time-saving tip if you want it. So I'm basically mixing this until it's kind of light and foamy, and all of the chunks of the dark brown sugar are mixed up. And so then we have this chocolate over here that has been cooling. And I'm just going to whisk this into our eggs and sugar. Let me tilt my camera down so you guys can see that a little better. We're gonna scrape the rest of this chocolate out of here. And it's hard to believe, but growing up, I thought I did not like chocolate. I realize now that I just had not had the right kind of chocolate. But these brownies were definitely a part of my kind of chocolate conversion. I don't know that I ever craved chocolate until I made these. So we're gonna go ahead and whisk the rest of this in. So now, and this comes together really quickly. So now we have this rye flour, and I don't know how well you can see it, but if you've never worked with rye flour, it has almost like a tannish, bluish tint. But one of the things that I really love about working with both this flour and the other grains we work with is that a lot of times when you're using commodity flour, people are used to flour just kind of being a carrier for other flavors. They don't really think that the flour can add any character or texture to the end product. And so that's one of kind of my favorite parts about it, especially when we transitioned to some of these grains. We didn't initially tell our customers. And so we got a lot of, oh, you know, this is great. I can't really put my finger on it. You know, I don't know what you did differently, but I love it. And so watching people's reactions when they found out, oh, well, we switched and we have, you know, we're using buckwheat here or we're using rye flour here, and that they're whole grains, people's mind are blown because people have this kind of idea that if we're using whole grains and something is healthy in that context, that there's like a flavor trade-off when sometimes it's the exact opposite. So to this delicious rye flour, I'm going to add some cocoa powder. And today we're using a Dutch cocoa powder. And then I have my baking powder, my cinnamon, my chili powder, and some espresso powder. And one thing I often get when I'm showing people this recipe, they're like, oh, I don't like coffee, you know, leave that out of my chocolate. But that's one of the beauties of espresso powder is that if you're using a small amount, and so I think here we're using less than a tablespoon, it does not make the end product taste like coffee or even like a mocha flavor, but instead it elevates the flavor of the chocolate. And so when we have this cocoa, this espresso powder, and then we have the melted chocolate, and we add this rich cocoa powder, and this is a really high fat Dutch cocoa powder, the intensity of the three of those really like ups the ante on the chocolate. So if you're a chocolate lover, then this is going to, you know, be a great recipe for you. So I'm just going to mix those dry ingredients together. I'm using this tiny whisk because all of the whisk in our kitchen are, you know, like this big. And so when I'm converting to working with things at home, I have to improvise a little bit. So this batter is going to be pretty thick. So I'm going to get rid of this whisk now. And we're going to just fold in these dry ingredients. It smells so good in here. So as you fold this in, if you're trying this at home, you'll notice this is a very thick batter. And one of the things I always share with people when I'm sharing this recipe is that one of the beauties of working with rye flour, since it does have that naturally lower gluten content, is that it's a little bit more forgiving. So, and I especially like it when I'm working with kids. So I do a rye sugar cookie dough. And when you have kids rolling it out and then they're reusing the scraps and rolling them back out, it gives us a little bit extra forgiveness so we can roll it out an extra time or two more than if we're using just the straight wheat flour before it starts to develop any toughness. Okay, so I'm just about getting those dry ingredients incorporated here. And so I'll just show you how thick and delicious that batter is. And so now we are going to take this pan. So I love this pan. It's from a company called US Pans. It's actually a mini loaf pan, but to me, the best part of the brownie are the edges. And so at our shop, we use these pans for all of our brownies because then every bite has a brownie edge. So before I throw these in here, I'm going to grab these walnuts that I toasted earlier, and we're just gonna toss these in. This recipe works really well with really any toasted nut. My favorite thing to use is actually a red walnut. The toasted red walnut, particularly with the flavor, I feel like it gives like a nice festive fall look. And I also love pecans, so I put them in everything. So this recipe gets a little bit of, whatever nut I have readily available. So just gonna grab my scoop here and I'll scoop these brownies out. And once I have the brownie scoop, I take a little bit of flaky sea salt and just sprinkle the top. And then I actually like to sprinkle a little extra cinnamon. Cinnamon and chocolate is such a wonderful combination. And so I'm going to set these aside and answer questions now, and I'll finish scooping these and eating them later. I wish that I could share them with you guys, but maybe next time we can do this in person. So, okay, I see we have some other lovers of Mexican hot chocolate on the in the chat.
Yeah, these look so good, Rachel. I wish I could taste them right now.
Yeah, I'm hoping everybody makes them at home. They're really great.
Definitely. And we will be sharing the recipe after the conference with everybody, so you can make them at home yourself. We also are, this is kind of an aside, but we are putting together a Grains and Revolution cookbook from today. So that cookbook will include a ton of recipes from people that are presenting today, including this one. Okay, so some questions. Firstly, someone loved your quote. I thought rye flour was for rye bread. No. That is a great quote. What are some other great things that you can use rye flour in other than bread and brownies?
So the other thing that I use rye flour in, we first converted all of our brownies to using rye flour, but what I used it in most after that is sugar cookies. So we make 14 different flavors of sugar cookies. That's one of our kind of signature items. We do a lot of gifts or like creating logos on cookies. And so we've incorporated, we don't use a straight rye flour, but we've incorporated some rye in those, particularly in the chocolate rollout sugar cookies. And we have a hot buttered rum sugar cookie dough that we do include some rye flour in as well.
Wow, that sounds delicious. And this rye might be the answer to this, but someone asked, what is your favorite grain to bake with and why?
Oh, that's a hard question. I'm gonna poke my head in my refrigerator and see if what's on the shelf gives me an answer. I probably say right now, I'm playing a lot with spelt and buckwheat, but also corn. Hazard Free Farms is another local farm that I source from. And I actually played around this summer with an Italian cornmeal cookie, which tasted like like a honey butter cornbread, but like in a handy cookie form. And it's like one of my favorite things now. So I have a lot.
Incredible. Yeah, there's just so many delicious grains out there, and it's fun to try them in new recipes and in new ways.
Definitely.
I have another question here about using locally sourced grains. It says, when using locally sourced and whole grains, do you find that you need to be more flexible with your recipes?
So that was actually one of my concerns when I first started baking with the grains. And the answer is yes and no. So one, we're not a bread bakery. And so cookies and some pastries are much more forgiving. So it does give us a little bit more leeway than we might otherwise have. But we also, the farmers that we work with have been really great at providing us, like, these are the specs for this flour. So if we, for example, if a certain crop came in and it had a higher protein count or than we were expecting, that we can mix it with something else. But yeah, in general, that because we don't bake bread, it hasn't been as much of a burden as I anticipated before we started transitioning.
Well, that's great to know. So cookies and brownies and just might be a little bit more forgiving when it comes to grains that are less, what's the word I'm looking for? Like
less standardized in a sense.
Yes, yeah, that's the word.
I feel like the biggest transition was just that you can't transition things 1-to-1 for wheat flour. Mm-hmm. And so figuring out the formulations from that perspective was actually harder than anything else with the transition.
For sure. Great. And then I guess we have time for one more question. Somebody said, it's the edges of the brownies in each bite for me. Do you try to source most of your ingredients sustainably and ethically? And also, what is the hardest item to procure?
Oh, so the answer is yes. So we have kind of a value spectrum, and we're actually working right now and working with a designer to actually have this graphically and put it on our website that shows kind of all of the criteria that goes into our sourcing. So it includes how sustainably things are sourced. We give extra points in our sourcing criteria for employee-owned companies. Because historically they tend to treat their employees better for obvious reasons. We also look at, so beyond sustainability, like animal welfare, when we're talking about dairy products. So we have kind of like this whole list, which has been a little difficult because sometimes we throw suppliers out that have been really good, but then they like do something egregious that violates one of our values. And so we have to part ways. But the hardest thing to source, actually, you know what? Egg yolks, interestingly enough. So we work with a Amish farm locally, and as our production increased, we stopped cracking shell eggs, and we would get liquid eggs because it was easier to, when you have to crack 200 eggs for a recipe. Yeah, not a great thing, but it's very hard to find organically free range liquid egg yolks separate. They only have like the commodity version. And so I've been like on the hunt for those for probably 2 years, but right now we're still manually like separating the eggs.
Wow. Well, that's really interesting, especially that you're having a harder time sourcing something that's not a grain. That's interesting to me. And yeah.
I would add a caveat to that. So the only reason that's the case is because I'm a part of the Artisan Grain Collaborative. And so for those that don't know, it's a collaborative based here in the Midwest, and it brings together bakers, millers, educators, nutritionists, farmers, so like the entire grain kind of value chain. And so through that organization, I've had the opportunity to actually meet and work with a lot of farmers. And so, for example, if a distributor is not coming to my location to drop things off, I have a relationship where I can text or email the farmer like, hey, can we bring our van down here and, pick up directly from the farm, or they'll let me know what's the best way to get their products. And so, yeah, that has made like that part of the process much easier than it was ever before.
That's great. Yeah, they are a wonderful organization. If people who are watching don't know about them, you should definitely look them up. They're also a sponsor of today's event, which has been great to work with them. Okay, I think that is just about it, Rachel. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today, both on the panel and in your kitchen. It's been wonderful to hear about your business and to learn from you. And we will be sharing this recipe so everyone can make these delicious brownies at home.
Great, thank you. It was my pleasure to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, bye now.
Bye-bye.
We are going to take a little break and then get ready for a presentation from Dora Tombo and then the seed saving panel. So we will see you all very soon.